Welcome to the first annual Building Hope Summit and Awards. Today we are here with educational innovators from across the country, and we're going to discuss ways to level up educational innovation for you. I kind of want to start with this. I want to start with for you, because when we started the categories for the awards, there's a lot of conversation around definitions, right? What does it mean to be an educational innovator? Every single one of your schools, regardless of the category you're being recognized for, innovates, right? But innovation can look very, very different. So when we talk about Ellen School, right? And people are like, how is folk arts innovative, right? And and then when you look at it, you go, oh, and you have the longer conversation, you go, anybody can take this. So for you guys, what does it mean? What is educational innovation mean? What's your definition for it? I'd love to hear what your thoughts are.
I just think it's ridiculous to think that we won't fail, because it's such a part of life. Life is all of these failures with the successes that ultimately, help us grow. It's been, what do you learn from that? How do you grow from that? How do you reflect upon that? Because that's the piece. And if we didn't fail, we would always be right here. It's the failures that lead to so much greater. I think the innovation that I bring, I am a school leader only in as much as everybody else on my team is. I benefit from a group of people who are amazing and founded the school, but together, collectively, we do this, and what makes me happy and keeps me coming back every day, even on the hardest days when we're struggling, is I have this collective team that we're all working on this mission together. And personally, that experience is new and feels completely innovative. So to be surrounded by school leaders with the kind of energy that you have is really encouraging, because that's not my previous experience. And it's like, this can only work really with the model I had. And nope, that's not the case. So that's beautiful.
Les was talking about the innovation that he has that is not the school model that's with the children, but actually the administration model. And they have a group of 12 advisors?
16 staff.
Okay, 16 staff, and there's no principal. And when I've talked about this with other folks, and they said, well, that can't happen. There has to be some leader. And then, well, that can't be replicable. It must be so unique. Just those 16 people get along, and that's not going to happen anywhere else. And so talk to me a little bit about how, for this genesis of it, and then how are you making it happen? And do you think other people can make it happen?
It can definitely happen, because we are not alone. There is an organization called Teacher Powered Practice that has essentially 15 guidelines of what this looks like. It has evolved over, so the school's been in existence going into our 8th year. And there were a large group of initial founders. 2 of them left pretty quickly. The rest of the team is still in place. And that's evolved more and more to become this teacher-powered model. And essentially what it looks like is we are all responsible for the school, so we're all on various committees, whether it's a building committee, operations, communications, curriculum. But together we research, we discuss things, we decide, and then we come up with ideas and proposals that we come back to the larger group, which we call our TPP, our Team Powered Practice. And then at that point, we make the proposal, and it's voted on. And if we come to the point where everybody can at least live with it, then we move on. And that's it. You are not going to get absolute, yes, I'm all the way in. But if everybody can at least live with that, knowing that we can work through any kind of difficulties because we trust one another, then it goes forward. And otherwise, it'll go back to the committee.
Have you ever had that standstill?
Oh, for sure.
Okay. I was thinking about a bunch of educators in one room agreeing on everything.
It happens more than you'd think. Okay. But the agreement, but it certainly happens. We're all passionate people, so especially if you're not part of that process and you're engaged in that research and the discussion, you don't have the full picture. That there tends to be debate, and so we'll take time and more than the 10 minutes allotted on the minutes and dig into that and try to get it so everybody understands the picture more fully. And if we truly can't, then we send it back until we can make it clearer for everybody.
Does that help with teacher turnover because there's a buy-in? And the second question is, do you think that model would help with a combined model? For example, I'm the executive director, but can I take pieces of that model and start to include my teachers in some of the more important decision, like curriculum choices, and as opposed to just 3 or 4 of us? Do you think there's a combination model that could work? Okay.
Absolutely.
Okay.
One of the sessions from the conference earlier this week was looking at all the reasons that teachers leave, and basically it comes down to feeling disengaged and not part of the communication. Like they have no role, and I'm looking through and like, nope. And it's because we aren't invested in that process. And from year to year, anybody could be on different committees.
Yeah.
So we struggled with like our curriculum committee, where at one point everybody was on there, and too many cooks in the kitchen, right? So these are the things we're dealing with this week. If you want to come join us for this week and discuss or just present some ideas, great. Otherwise, it's just the 5 of us who are meeting, and we'll come back to you. But I absolutely having more people in those conversations. But it is that investment, that engagement, knowing that you're part of the whole process. That I've been in other places, and every day I'm just sort of re-energized, and even on the worst days, I know that I'm part of a group that we work on that together. So
it seems like education and really anything is always served best by those who are closest to it, right? Like if you're the one, and when we get these, dictations from on high, from whoever, and you're like, but have you talked to a student in the past 42 years? Because that's not what they do, right? And those, but it's the front lines of it, right?
Right, and your other
That's
question, it allows us to be nimble, right? Because it's just us, it's internal, so that we can adjust to the situations much faster and help kids.
That facilitates your innovation then,
Yeah.
right? Because you don't have to go through 16 different channels and boards and things to get approval to do what is right for the kids.
Right.
Wow. Wouldn't that be nice?
So I think one of the issues is that folk arts is a common word. It's a word in the vernacular, so people have all these different images in their head of what that is, and that's not necessarily usually not what we mean by it, right? So when we talk about folk arts, we're really talking about what's the knowledge from families and communities and people that, right, is of value. And folk arts, in our term of it, have to do with kind of collective expression that comes out of communities, the things that are important and valued within communities. So taken in that light, then it's more like just the importance of welcoming all of that into the school and just kind of being the opposite of, we're here to teach you how to not be like your parents, that's the opposite model of what we're trying to do. And, part of it too is just seeing our task as building global citizens, and to do that, what is the skill set? What is the mindset? What are the habits of thinking that you want kids to have, right? And it's kind of the opposite of stereotyping or dismissing or marginalizing. Mm-hmm. And so, but, I'm not telling this in good order, but our community group that founded the school came out of Asian American youth leadership perspective. Mm-hmm. And as we were looking at it, we're like, we can't start at high school though. We really want to start at K. And it's building this, not that you can't start at high school and not that you can't start it anywhere, but as we were contemplating what we're going to try with this shift, we decided we were going to start with K, even though that wasn't directly our background, but just how do you cultivate and really value these practices of kids listening to each other, kindness, it sounds a little bit simple, but those kind of values
you showed us,
being really just important in the school. And and that folk arts education practices that really have to do with hearing and listening to each of our personal experiences, and then from that talking about what can we learn from each other. It's just a different perspective on what can happen in schools.
I love that. I love
And also that the folk art stuff is also a vehicle to the academic stuff.
Yeah.
Because people always say, well, if you spend your whole day basket weaving, like, how are they gonna learn to read?
Right, right.
Right, and we're like, well, we're not spending the whole day on basket weaving, but like, you can teach these other skills of school while you're looking at the authentic experience of families and individuals and communities and honoring and valuing that.
Shannon, I'd like you to talk to us a little bit about the innovations that you have with the integration, I think, well, not only the fact that you're in a museum, but how you integrate your community.
Mm-hmm.
And what I thought was really particularly interesting is that a lot of times there's high schoolers out there making a difference, but you're not teaching high schoolers, and they're going to the city council with stuff going, let's do this. Yeah. I'd like to, if you share a little bit more about how you guys are innovating around that and how you're making those connections.
So our curriculum is grounded in the history of Rochester, and it is a spiral curriculum. So the students in kindergarten, right all the way to 5th grade, go through 6 historical time periods 3 times. So they hit each of those time periods 3 times. And through the lens of that content, they are exploring projects and sort of purpose for their learning. By the time they get to 6th grade, they are well-versed in understanding their community and the history from before people to today and tomorrow. And so they're ready to take on something really big. And so they, with their teachers, look at what is hot, what's really important in our community that we need to explore further, and how can we really serve. So we have taken on some projects early on. They were more revitalization projects because our city was really starting to lose people, and it was about trying to bring people back. So there's a famous story of wanting to rewater the Erie Canal downtown Rochester. And so the class worked on what revitalization projects could look like in rewatering canals, and we went to San Antonio, Texas to see the Riverwalk. We went to Providence, Rhode Island to see the canals there. And so then the students came back and they said, Mayor Duffy, what do you think? Like there's these other cities that are doing it, and they've brought all of this tourism to their communities, and we know it can happen here, which was extremely, of course, impressive to the mayor and to the city council. It took 20 years, but they're finally doing something. But now the projects really are much more around equity and access. And so the more recent projects have been related to food equity in our city. And we didn't have a food policy in our city that was related to making sure that families, no matter what neighborhood they were in, had access to nutritious food and produce in their area. So students went to cities around the country to get information from other communities that were doing it really well, and then brought that information back and presented in front of stakeholders. And then this year, talking about museum, this year it was really this focus on whose story is being told in museums and whose story is not being told, and how can we really make sure that everyone has a place and that you're not missing key important information when you're sharing. So students actually, instead of going to different cities, they all went together to DC and went to several museums in the Smithsonian to learn more from museum curators about how they decide on what is being displayed, what stories are being told, and then presented that information to our museum to make those improvements. So yes, I would say that is truly innovative, and it really helps the students feel empowered so that when they are leaving us after 6th grade, they feel like, yeah, I've already made a difference and I know more of what I can do in my own community to help everyone.
I think for us, because we're so unique in the population that we serve, and we only serve kids on the spectrum of autism, it's really, innovation means just really looking at our population and thinking out of the box. moving away from traditional practices and educational services and really looking at how our kids are going to be successful and what they need. So, for example, really forming relationships with our team so our team really knows who they are and what they want. We have kids who are verbal and nonverbal. So those students being able to have a voice, hence my student empowerment category, that's why it was so important to me. It's really teaching our kids how to have a voice, how to be self-advocate. And you guys have heard me say this probably over and over again, but don't let the autism own you, you own your autism. Innovative means to us looking at our kids as individuals, not as disabled people.
So, one thing that I think about, and especially through talking to the other finalists, that we seem to have in common is I think we're really questioning what is the purpose of education. We have different methods, there's different signature pieces of our program that are different, but I think we're all really questioning the purpose of education, right? So education can clearly be used to stratify society and keep people in their place,
Right.
Or it can do other things. It can create, the leaders that we need for our world. And I think at essence, like it's a deeper thing. It's not just the methods and approaches, but it's this deeper, what are we going for?
So what are we going for?
Learning.
But what does that mean to you?
Learning is a natural process, and the education system tends to make that much less natural. You're constricted in a lot of ways, and I know personally, whatever I'm attracted to, I'm driven by curiosity. I explore that, and I'm not looking at one particular subject area when I do that. Oh, I have to look at this just from the angle of science, right? It's much broader. And so when you can expand that definition to something that is much more natural, where you're pulling in all of these elements and are not restricted by time necessarily, that I have 50 minutes to think about this and then I can move on, but I can instead do a deep dive on that. I can explore the things that are important to me, whether it is something that's been assigned in some fashion or it is coming as a passion piece, but it makes the process much more natural. And you go back to, again, that we are human, first of all, and you can't even get to the learning aspect if you're not addressing the matters of what it means to be human and what it means to take care of that person, to put them in a place where they're willing and able to. So I think that's what I hear from all of us as well. The learning is obviously important, but it's much more holistic.
Just to piggyback off of that and really understanding, I think that the concept of just education is, when you go back before there was actually a schoolhouse, right? It's the passing down of knowledge from generation to generation. And understanding that in that process that you pass down knowledge, there are challenges, there are global challenges that our children, which are our students, eventually become that citizen that will be faced with those challenges. And one of the great things I discovered in this process is that no matter what category you fell in as a semifinalist, all of you were doing great things in all three categories. Mm-hmm. And I think that's transformative when you start thinking about that experience, that journey of the student, and creating that global citizen. And each one of you are looking at your community and are looking at the challenges that your community face, and you're coming up with new innovative styles of being able to deliver that education. And I think that makes it unique. And I couldn't think of a better bunch to bring together and consider to be winners already. But definitely, to me, it was very opening to see how the next generation of students that I will be seeing in the college and the higher ed environment have really been exposed to all this culture, to all this knowledge, to all this experiential learning that really prepares them to be an all-around citizen, that global citizen that we need.
I appreciate you raising the historical context of education, which I think is critical when we think about innovation. And it starts with thinking about when education was created, when schools were created, they were not created for the people and the students that we are serving today. So there's a history of passing down approaches that were not innovative and that were not aligned with the rich cultural that so many, and identities that so many of our students have. So innovation is dismantling those historical barriers that have been in the way of underrepresented, underserved, underprivileged, whatever you want to say, that have kept them from succeeding. So I think that's what innovation is. What do I think?
Yeah. Well, and Angela, one of the things that and you bring up something, I don't know if you guys have seen that Sir Ken Robinson little whiteboard sketch. It's brilliant. And because he goes and he talks about when our educational system as we know it right now was created, it was created for factory workers. Do not ask the questions, walk in a line, the bells ring, do your shift, do your stuff. Well, we now have robots for that, okay? So, but and then all we've done with our educational system is like try to Band-Aid, and people have, bless their hearts, they've done everything they can to try to make that big behemoth work. But when you're trying to create something new, when you're trying to be innovative, you gotta dismantle it. That is part of the natural, if you look at nature, the part of the natural cycle, it's creation and destruction, right? It's not bad to dismantle something that doesn't work, right?
It doesn't work for people who it wasn't intended for. We've got
that
to
that is important.
The majority of us are serving.
Yeah.
It wasn't for our students.
No.
College wasn't for African American students. Hence, you have historically Black colleges and universities. Most of our public schools were not intended. Hence, you had segregation, desegregation, integration, charter schools. There's a reason that all of these structures are here. We have to look at those structures and say, okay, what about the structure works? And what about the structure do we need to dismantle and tear down? There's where you start your innovation.
I think that's great. So let's talk about that. Because when I've been out there in the world talking about innovative practices and even sharing some of your schools with other people, so, that's great, but then when do they go back to the real world? And I'm like, but it is the real world. It's just not your real world, right? And so, but don't they have to, when do they learn math? And when do they learn this? I'm like, it's integrated. No, I've never seen that, right? And aren't you supposed to be miserable at school? I was miserable at school. Why do my kids not be miserable at school? And you're like, no, it is actually not the point. And it's hard, I think. Change is always hard, right? But I think we have a beautiful moment in time right now because I think a lot of parents and a lot of people finally saw what was really going on in the schools that their children were in and went, this really doesn't work for my kid. And so we have this opportunity to go, okay, let's build a better beast.
Part of what Angela was saying, right? It's like, it works in the interest of who? And it doesn't work in the interest of who. So do you want our education system to sort kids into warehouse prison, not worth it, we don't have time, and the leaders of society are over here? Or do you want to break that down? So, there are some ways in which the system is set up to work in a certain way. And so part of our challenge is not just, here's ideas you may not have thought about before, but there are interests who want to keep things the same. There are interests that don't want more equality, that don't want even global citizens, that want passive consumers and recipients will just be like, what do you want me to do? How fast do you want me to do it?
Right.
And that's not what we're about, right? We're about changing the world through, our students being the leaders.
When I think about your comment about dismantling what exists, I think about agency. Because so we went through a process of reimagining a high school experience for our students a few years ago. And it starts with, what is the portrait of a graduate? What do we want our students to be as humans, as young adults when they leave our school? And yes, that includes, I want them to have the preparation to be able to make choices for their future. It includes so many more things, so many other things, right? The kind of problem solvers they are, the kind of leaders they are, seeing themselves as leaders and change agents in our community. And so when you have the agency to design your school program around the human beings that you want to help bring into this world, that's where innovation starts. And I think that agency and thinking about the moment we're in right now, I just have to say that I worried at the beginning of the pandemic. We started by saying, we're going to find out what's wrong with education, we're going to fix it. But we've continued, the Band-Aids are bigger, but we're still expecting educators to continue doing everything they were already doing and fix it at the same
Yes.
time.
Yeah.
And I just want to say that innovation takes time
Mhm.
and support for teachers, for leaders, for students in the process,
Yes.
so that we can actually build something different.
To your point, like we can't have educational innovation, like it can't just like come out of a box and go, here you go, do that and you'll be innovative.
Mhm.
But there are things that you guys have experienced that you're doing right now that you could share maybe about what are some of the things that did work and how and why, right? What are the, when you move forward and you say, okay, agency, it's really important. And agency is a word, it's a very educated word, right? So what are some other ways we can explain agency to other folks who might be watching?
For us, again, educating students with autism, it's such a different playing field than the rest of my colleagues. We really have to break down perceptions of what an individual with a disability is all about, because our country really looks at the disability first, and then there's a human being behind that. And if they have a disability, they can't, there's no way, they'll empty trash, maybe that's what they're good for. And so for us, we've really had to build relationships to allow our community around us to feel comfortable. We had to be really innovative in how to build those relationships, inviting them in to see our kids in action, our students going to those different sites in the community so that we could expose the community to what our kids are all about. And sure, that's engagement, but that's also innovation, because we actually sat down and said, how do we include our community so that eventually we're going to start putting our young adults out there to work. But we have to break down first those perceptions and those obstacles so that students with autism have, and our students are not going to college, we're not a gen ed program. Our students, we're prepping them for the real world, whatever that may be, learning to be on your own, learning to volunteer, learning to have a job, whether it's 2 hours a week or 40 hours a week, whatever that may be for that individual, but being successful. That sounds great, right? Writing that down and talking about it and you're excited, but if you don't have an innovative way of introducing that to your community, then you might as well just throw it in the garbage can because it's going nowhere. So you have to be innovative, creative on how you're gonna move your students out into the community.
So as charter school leaders, and a college leader, but as charter school leaders in particular, there's a lot of misperceptions about what a charter school is, right? So it's first leaping over those barriers, right? And then even a lot of times it's barriers about the population for those kids, right? Or from those neighborhoods. And then there's those barriers as well. So leaping over the barriers, what are some ways that you guys are leaping over those barriers? She's inviting people into the school to come see my kids, right? And her kids are going places, and now they're out in the world and are working. And the story that you had told as well about at the country club,
Yes,
right? Like
yes.
they wanted more,
Right.
They got more, and
Right.
they did fantastic, right? Because they actually met them.
Right.
So what are some ways that you guys are getting over some of these barriers?
So I'd say that in our school it's similar, that we really use the community as the classroom. So we are out in our city and beyond with students all the time, and they're really learning from the experts rather than just learning from the teachers. Teachers are really important. I'm never going to say that they're not, but learning from a contractor, or learning from a doctor or a researcher is going to be even more powerful. And it's not just more powerful for the student, it's powerful for that person as well, for them to realize that they might be 8 years old, but they have something to say and they're really eager to learn about this kind of career in service of some kind of project. And so, when we think about barriers, I think about breaking down adult biases that children can't contribute yet because they're not old enough. And so we spend a lot of time really helping to build those relationships among the community so that the community trusts that really the children are the voice of the future. And I know that's cheesy, but it's true, and that they really do have a stronger voice sometimes than even us adults.
I think for our school, it's really important that we don't allow the deficit mindset and to speak about our children from the perspective of what they can't do, right? And so we always talk about what they can do and the power of yet.
Yes.
I
love that.
Yes. And so, and I also invite people in to see our school and to see our scholars and to see them at work and to see them in a kindergarten classroom having dialogue and saying, you know, I agree with what you're saying. I'm thinking differently about what you're saying. And I'm always, and I don't know why, I'm always surprised that people are surprised when they see our children, you know, in action and they see the learning, you know, happening and how actively engaged they are in the process of learning. And so I think one of the biggest barriers is mindset.
Yes.
And people have really bought into, especially in my particular community, bought into the narrative of what Black children and brown children are able to accomplish and do. So,
That is why they are surprised. There's a mindset.
So we have to dismantle all the adults' mindsets. Okay, we've got 15 minutes, go.
So,
Fix it.
so I am standing back and looking at what you guys are doing. But I'm also here because I'm in a unique place where my campus houses a K-12 with a charter school partner, KIPP school. And they're serving that same exact population that you mentioned, that are Black and brown students in the heart at the north end of Miami-Dade County. And how we enter into this conversation is simply by saying you belong.
Absolutely.
You've been part of this college campus all through your K-12 experience. And we actually have an exploration station that we it's on campus. It's a nursery. It starts from 6 weeks to VBK. And now students after VBK stay on campus, transfer into that K-12. And then in partnership, they're doing dual enrollment, their junior and their senior year, and they're transferring into their college career.
That's fantastic.
So that's how higher ed could enter into this conversation and say, you know what? They belong. They're
Yes.
part of this campus. And I just want to highlight something very special. And we were talking a little bit about it last night in the committee, was at North Campus, we're home of the School of Justice. And we have two pieces of the Twin Towers steel beams. One of them is in our 9/11 memorial. And this year, we honored, like we traditionally honor, we got back to honoring post-pandemic. And what was special is we recommemorated it because on black marble around the steel truss, we put the names of every life that was lost. And we partnered with our charter school on campus. We invited the kids over and we had the search and rescue chief that responded to Surfside be the keynote speaker. Think about that experience. Here's a child that was not born when 9/11 occurred. And I know all of us here remember that day very vividly in our minds. Then on top of that, having to hear from the chief that responded to a catastrophic emergency. And then they start picturing themselves as that firefighter, as that police officer at the campus that they took on their education all along, right? So it's not a barrier anymore.
Right.
You broke that barrier when you were 6 weeks old and your mom or dad decided to bring them to our exploration station. And then from there on, it just continued on.
I think that's
Right.
a beautiful testament to how because we've been all pushed us apart in education, charters, traditional, private, college, and like it's different. But we're all serving human beings with a life cycle of growth and mindset and being able to partner colleges and charter schools, preschools, having that's a pure innovation thing, and that's something that can be that's the other part, can be replicated. With any new thing you want to do, you will find 100 reasons not to do it. All right? And the ones that people always think they're so smart, but like, this is why it's going to fail. And you're like, that's the easy part, right? The hard part is finding the one reason why it's going to succeed. And you can. And everybody can. And that's the thing. You guys did it. And not because somebody said, hey, Furman, like, let me give you a roadmap and you go do it. You said, no, we need this. And you made it happen.
Can I tell you the one reason?
Yes.
It's the child. If we're not there for that, what purpose are we there for?
So, you know, it's really interesting. It made me think about a quick story in our school district, we had a family who wanted to come to our school, Palm Beach School for Autism. And the child was really the mom felt like the child wasn't being served, was really struggling. The school called us, which normally they don't, before this child started. We accepted the child, of course, and they said, this child is trouble. He's been suspended. We're getting ready to expel him. He can't read. This whole perception. And we're like, bring it on. And we love a challenge. And so this little guy started, and within 3 months, he was reading. We addressed his behaviors immediately. And worked with the family. That's just as important, right? Working with our families, because the family had given up. That's all they heard was, he can't. No way. He's not going anywhere, and we refused. That's what makes us innovative. Is all of us refuse to believe Black, brown, African American, Asian, whatever it is, can't. We know they can. We have to give them that opportunity. And this little guy, now it's, by the way, it was one of our very first graduates who got hired full time at the local hotel, and he's still there 2 years later. So don't tell me you can't, right? Because we can all share those stories. And don't tell me you're giving up, because I refuse. So, and we're all that way. It's not unique to me. As leaders, we all believe that, and that's why we're doing what we do.
And I appreciate you bringing up families, because families are an integral part of the education process. They are every child's first teacher.
Absolutely.
And family members know their child better than anyone. And I think sometimes in our schools across the country, we do ourselves a disservice when we don't partner with the families, because we've decided they're first generation. They don't know. We've decided, well, there's not a lot of literacy there. They don't speak English. Let's just focus on the child. That is the wrong thing to do, because we can work with our families. When you have the school and the families partnering together, and one way, innovatively, not rocket science, is we do what we call a family education series. We provide our families with the tools to support their kid at home. You'll have young mothers saying, well, I really don't know how to read in English to my child. Don't read in English. There's a mindset, my child needs to speak English all the time. No, they don't. You need to just read to your child. They need to be exposed to words, whether they are in English or Spanish. But we do this thing that we're better because we're English speaking. We're better because we're college educated. Those are other barriers that we need to dismantle and break down to serve the student at the center.
Well said.
Yeah, absolutely.
And the families are essential.
Critical.
And whether we talk about it as a three-legged stool, where it's student, us, and the family, or maybe like the model of the car, where the student is the driver of the education, and then the parents, family, and us are in that car with them. But we are all essential to that process. And for our model, where we have students basically in the same advisory with the same lead teacher from grades 6 through 12, potentially, you get to know that student intimately. So if you're not in connection with a family on a regular basis, you're missing out on a huge aspect of their lives.
Well, I think one of the things that the pandemic did for us was it forced our hand to have even more contact points with our families. So they can get to us a number of different ways now. We can Zoom you, we can Google Meet, we can, there are so many different ways to have those touch points so that we can put them, if they're struggling or they're in crisis, we can, direct them to the appropriate services.
I think one of the ways that I think about doing that is just reducing both the experience and the perception of otherness. Throughout my career, I have tried to always live, work, and send my kids to school in the same community. My kids don't happen to go to my school right now, but they grew up with my students. They went to kindergarten, and were in choir, or were in summer camp with my kids. And we try to make sure that we provide a lot of opportunities for our alumni to come back, or our parents to work on our campus in different ways. This isn't those kids to me, to our staff. It's my kids. And when I hear you talk about the work you're doing, I think the reason that you can do that is you see the children on your campus, and they're your kids.
They're your kids.
They're kids of your community, and you are building up your community by building up these kids. And I think that when we reduce that sense of the other, like the parents that I work with, they're my peers. They're not the people that I drove in from the suburbs to serve. They're the parents that are living next door to me and whose kids went to kindergarten with my kids.
Yeah.
So that the walls happen a lot of the time, and I think we're seeing this in our country right now when we allow ourselves to be influenced by others or even by ourselves to like perpetuate this sense of otherness.
Right.
So
Love that.
one thing I think, and going back to innovation, and we don't talk about enough of what this happened and what happens in innovation. It's not always success.
Yeah.
There's a lot of failure in that
Yeah.
process.
Yeah.
And we want to highlight the success so hopefully people can replicate it because it's work.
Yeah.
But there's a lot that goes through that process.
We're identifying that the barriers are a problem. We're identifying that the divisions are a problem. How do we innovate around that, right? And some of the things are simple community conversations, but how do we push forward? And it isn't always going to work. And I think that sometimes when people put the barriers up, it's because, oh, I tried to invite this parent in and they were a train wreck and it was or, oh, I did a drive and nobody showed up, so I'm never going to do it again. Like when you put something forward and it fails, people feel like then it's game over, right? So that's part of the creative process is test and adjust. I mean, that is the only way. But so how do we help those who want to try but are afraid to?
We need to be real. It's hard. It's hard running a charter school. It's hard being innovative. There's just nothing easy about it. But as you said, you always have to remember your why. And that was what our speeches were about yesterday during the finalists. It's what's my why? Well, my why is very different than your why because I have a son with autism. That's what drove me, even though there were all these barriers and obstacles in the way saying, no, it can't happen. No, this is not welcome in this community. No, the traditional public school offers something. I don't know why you're doing it. But I knew it wasn't enough. Just like all of you. And it wasn't truly addressing what my son needed or other kids that follow him needed for their autism. And I also believe with my passion, just the way you all do, that there's more our individual students can give. And that's what drives you. So it is hard. I will never say to another potential charter school leader, yeah, do it. I gotta tell you, I've been asked.
Yeah.
And I'll be honest, and I sit down and I start with all the negatives, because there's a lot.
Yeah.
And then I go into all and negatives are here and positives are here. Because then I go into the why. If you don't have a why, then don't do this. If you don't feel it in your heart, don't do this because you think you're gonna make money or you're gonna climb politically. Don't do this. You have to have a why. And the why ties in with all of our missions, right? So I think that's what I would say to a potential leader.
It's truly special to see that and I'm putting myself through a lens of a parent, is to see the variety of opportunity that our children have today, right? Unfortunately, I don't live in each one of your committees, communities, and our committee members don't meet, but something came out and said, don't I wish I could have gone back and sent my kids or be part of that school when I was a child. So just kudos all around on what you guys doing. And it's really, it's a special time in history, and charter schools are really, I think the intended purpose. And I go back to, in my state, Jeb Bush was the one that really raised the flag about schools of choice. And the result of charter schools is exactly what the foundation and what the first people that started talking about and leaders was to give that opportunity to choice to children. And each one of you guys are excellent in what you're doing in your schools.
So thank you everybody for this amazing discussion about all things education, because we'd like to try to focus on educational innovation, but great schools incorporate so many things. I want to reflect a couple of the learnings maybe that we've had today, which were educational innovation. It ain't easy. Charter schools are challenging, but it's worth it. It is worth it. And when we focus on the child and the families and the context in which the world that we live in, realistically,
Yes.
then we're able to innovate. And innovation doesn't just magically happen perfectly out of the box, nor should it. And those iterations and the adaptations that we make, that just makes it more robust. And for me personally, I think that when we walk the walk, the children learn more from what they see us do, less than what we tell, or more than what we tell them, right? So when they see us make things and try real hard and fail, and then they see us get up again and try something else, and if it's for their best interest, and we're saying we're doing this for you, our purpose, our heart, what does that say to them, right? Talk about belonging and all that kind of thing. So innovating is not it's not Jetsons, right? We're doing this because we know that we need to reach people in different ways, and we grow and they have different needs, and we can. And that's the other beautiful thing that I wanted to have all of you hear, because these leaders are educating and innovating in so many different ways. And it's because you have to have a little bit of that fearlessness, right? A little of that grit, right? And a little bit of, I don't really care what everybody's going to say. No, we're going to try this, right? And what has happened is you try, and it works, right? And you touch these students and you reach these families, and it's a beautiful thing. We just need a little more of it. So thank you guys so much. And this was our Educational Innovation Rockstar group from the first annual Building Hope Summit and Awards. Thank you.